All right, we want to take you now to Capitol Hill, where Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is testifying about the war with Iran. He and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Caine, are answering questions before the House Armed Services Committee. Let's listen.
In this next budget funds, so getting in front of that budget cycle, which had been notoriously unpredictable, coming out of the continuing resolution of FY25, to fund this and then a historic bill in FY26, laid the groundwork for this historic budget to ensure that we're not coming at a cold start here. We came into this administration. Reconciliation was a beautiful tool. We were able to use that through that one big beautiful bill to fund the priorities of this department. We spent on $4 billion on barracks, started immediately getting after the quality of life of barracks. Because of the austerity of the Biden administration, we traded off of maintenance, traded off of quality of life to try to fund other things operationally. This budget stops that cycle and both invests in sustainment and modernization, which is something that's critically important. So without that reconciliation bill, I think, Mr. Chairman, we'd be in a very different place. So thank you for that.
Great. Well, as you are aware, the expansion of the defense industrial base is the principal focus of this year's NDAA. So in addition to enacting this budget request that's been submitted, we want to work with you to enhance the department's statutory authorities to improve the capacity of our DIB. What additional changes in law, such as the additional multi-year block buy authority, would you recommend that we pursue in this year's NDAA?
A few aspects of the acquisition transformation that's been undertaken by Undersecretary Duffy in acquisitions and sustainment. So there are some aspects of that we'd like to codify even more. But you mentioned it. Multi-year procurement is incredibly important and one of the most important parts of this bill. When this committee and this Congress funds those things, companies are already breaking ground on tens of billions of dollars of new plants. You name we've got 14 in our ammunition council that we're focusing on certain ammunitions. There are 14 that are critical. You know, PAC-3s, SM-3s, SM-6s, THAADs, Patriots, Tomahawks, AMRAAMs, JASSMs, you name PRISMs, you name them. We were building them at too slow and too low a level. Now the companies are going to pay for those factories and those production lines. And when Congress gives those 5 to 7 year demand signals, they'll then fund it, not just, hey, can we get 10 more per month, but can we 2x, 3x, 4x the production, pay for it now, and the companies invest accordingly. So it's been a critical aspect of some of what we've done so far, but we need more of those 5 to 7 year investments.
Great. General Caine, what does the $1.5 trillion budget mean for the warfighter and our ability to project forces and secure our interests around the globe?
Chairman, you know, in my view, this represents a historic down payment on future security. If the budget is approved and ultimately deployed, as we look at the character of warfare changing very, very fast, what's layered in to this budget by our civilian leaders will allow us to start getting ahead of where technology is evolving. And as I mentioned, the character of warfighting is changing pretty quickly. Mass, simultaneity, autonomy, undersea, space, cyber, information, all of those ways that are now manifesting themselves on the battlefields around the world require a higher end of capital investment, and that's why we're grateful for the opportunity to have this budget make its way to the joint force. So it's an important down payment on the future here, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With that, I yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you. Mr. Hurst, drag you into the conversation here. We have not yet received from the Pentagon the costs of the war. So just for the record, we'd like to get that as soon as possible. Certainly the munitions expended, but also underreported is we've had a fair amount of equipment destroyed, including 2 C-130s with the rescue of our downed airmen. So do you have either A, a cost estimate coming to us anytime soon, or B, a specific supplemental request?
Thank you for that question. So approximately at this day, we're spending about $25 billion on Operation Epic Fury. Most of that is in munitions. There's part of that is obviously O&M and equipment replacement. We will formulate a supplemental through the White House that will come to Congress once we have a full assessment of the cost of the conflict.
Sure. So you're saying the full cost at this point is $25 billion?
Yeah, that's our estimate for the cost.
Okay. interesting, because I'm glad you answered that question, because we've been asking for a hell of a long time, and no one's given us the number. So if you could get those details over to us, that would be great. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned the nuclear aspect of Iran and the war. And it is worth noting that every president prior to this one, including President Trump in his first term, also prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon without actually having to go to war in Iran. So we need to keep that in mind. But also, since the war started, Iran's nuclear arsenal has not been weakened in any way. And at the moment, in negotiations, what Iran is saying, basically pay us to open up the strait. That's their position, which is completely untenable. I agree. It's worth noting, of course, that the strait was open before the war started. Now we're negotiating to get back to status quo. And Iran's most recent offer is to say, we'll talk about nukes later. So what is the plan to actually turn all of this lethal kinetic action into an improvement in the nuclear situation? Because we haven't gotten there yet. Play it out for us. How does that happen? How does it actually lead to that result?
Well, I would take issue with the premise of the question that nothing was done. Operation Midnight Hammer was a very effective.
Well, I didn't say nothing was done. I said in this war.
Ultimately,
this war started.
Well, this under this administration, unlike other administrations, which cut bad deals and pallets of cash with no ability to oversee whether Iran is actually pursuing a nuclear program.
Which is where
if we
we're
want
at.
to litigate JCPOA or the Iran deal, our view, the president's view, is that was a very bad deal.
Okay.
That gave them a
That's
bunch
the
of money
past.
up front.
What's the future?
To fund, you talked about negotiated deals. Allowed them to fund their proxies and spread Hamas and Hezbollah all around the region, build up nuclear capabilities.
Great. What are we going to do now?
President Trump has been clear-eyed, from the killing of Qasem Soleimani to the pulling out of the Iran deal to Midnight Hammer and now to this effort to recognize that you have to stare down this kind of enemy who's hell-bent on getting a nuclear weapon and get them to a point where they're at the table giving it up in a way that
so they
never have it.
So they haven't broken yet. Okay, we haven't gotten there yet. For all of the
Well, their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
just
watching
a quick
it.
second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions, and they had a conventional shield of thousands of missiles.
So Operation Midnight Hammer accomplished nothing of substance. It left us at exactly the same place we were before. So much so that
their facilities were bombed and obliterated. Their ambitions continued, and they're building a conventional shield.
All right, let me try again.
It's the North Korea strategy. You know this very well. The North Korea strategy was use conventional missiles to prevent anybody from challenging them so they could slow walk their way to a weapon. President Trump saw Iran at its weakest moment, took an action to ensure, in a way that only the United States of America could do with our Israeli partners,
and yet
to ensure their
conventional
shield was brought
one
to
other
heel,
question,
which we've done.
if I could get to it. So on Ukraine, a year plus ago, your advice, the president's advice, was Ukraine had no cards to play. They should go cut the best possible deal they could. Clearly that was wrong. What did you miss? What did you miss about the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that you didn't see that Ukraine was going to be capable of doing what they've done in the last 14 months?
What we didn't miss, and we're here in this committee, is that Joe Biden, with no accountability, gave hundreds of billions of dollars of our weapons to Ukraine, to an outcome that never would have happened if President Trump was president. So he pulled out our. You guys don't talk about that. Ultimately, President Trump believes there should be a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, and it serves
But you didn't expect Ukraine to be where they're at right now. I'm asking you, just from a strategic standpoint, what
I think the Ukrainians have shown great courage, and I appreciate that Europe is now paying for any weapons that we provide.
All right, I yield back. Thank you.
All right, now I want to remind everybody, everybody wants to get their questions, so we are going to be sticking strictly to the.
All right, you've been watching Pete Hegseth, the Defense Department Secretary and the Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, answering questions from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Let's bring in CBS News contributor Elliot Ackerman. He is a former CIA officer and Marine Corps veteran. It was getting pretty heated there in the clip we just played, Elliot, between Congressman Adam Smith and Pete Hegseth. What is your take on what they said?
Well, I mean, I think we can see this testimony is probably going to proceed down two parallel tracks. The first track is this $1.5 trillion defense spending bill, which really addresses the changing nature of warfare and the changes that need to occur within the U.S. military. But the other track is the strategic track that is about the war in Iran? What does the end state look like? And then, as we saw in that line of questioning with Ukraine, what are the strategic decisions that the administration has sort of missed thus far?
All right. The secretary has not yet been asked about specifics. You saw there, Adam Smith trying to get at the goals in this particular war. The secretary referenced Operation Midnight Hammer, which we heard from the president in the wake of that operation that Iran's nuclear ambitions had been obliterated. But then now we are told by the secretary and by others that Iran was imminently going to have a nuclear weapon. I think what the congressman was trying to get at is which is true. Hegseth said they still had nuclear ambitions, but is a nuclear ambition enough to launch a war?
Enough of a threat.
Yeah, enough of an imminent threat, an ambition.
I think, as long as the Iranian regime is in power, they will have those nuclear ambitions. It's very difficult to see them giving them up whole cloth. So it sort of comes to this challenge of, what is the administration's long-term strategy if you have someone across the negotiating table for you who is dead set on getting a nuclear weapon? And the administration has really struggled with its messaging on Iran from Midnight Hammer up to the present as to, what is the end state here? And I think what we're seeing in the tension in these lines of questioning is that fact that the messaging has not been consistent.
So, Elliot, is it clear then to assume that given that the administration is negotiating with the Iranian regime for some end to this war, that once that negotiation happens and is complete, however it is, that the Iranian regime will still be in place?
I think at this point, it seems as though that is certainly the near-term outcome. And then if you have the same Iranian regime in place, typically we see in the wakes of wars like this, those regimes become even more hard line. And so then the question becomes, do they slowly try to resume their nuclear weapons program, because that's an enormous point of leverage for them. And I think the administration, and the tension we're seeing is that the administration strategically now is in a tough place, because their initial strategy was that they would launch these attacks when Iran was at its weakest and that the regime would collapse. And that didn't happen. And now it's difficult for them to find a path forward.
All right, Elliot Ackerman, thank you so much.